Okay, I want to welcome everybody. We're in lesson 11 in Hebrews chapter 11. So we are in starting Hebrews chapter 11, or again remembering where we are. Here we're in the second part of the letter to the Hebrews. First part dealing with setting up the idea that Jesus is in fact the best way to go. There is no better way than him. And now in the second part, in the last three chapters, we have the encouragement part and one last warning also that we're going to get into as we roll into chapter 12. There we've had four warnings up until now, and we're going to get a fifth a little bit later on here. So as we start off, let's go through our reading here of Hebrews chapter 11, and we'll start over here with Shirley and Ray today, and work back that way, and then up to the front to Todd, and back that way, and then over to Gil. So 2 verses each, Hebrews chapter 11.
Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good testimony.
Through faith we understand that the world was framed by the word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. By faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous. It was righteous, God testifying of his gift, and by it he being dead yet speaketh.
By faith Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death, and he was not found, because God had taken him. Now before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. And without faith it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists, and that he rewards those who seek him.
By faith Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with the godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith he dwelt in a land of promise and in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise.
Where he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. By faith Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him faithful who had promised.
Therefore also there was born of the man and him who is good as dead as that, as many descendants as the stars of heaven in number, and innumerable as the sand which is in the seashore. All these died in faith, without receiving promises, but having seen them, and having welcomed them from a distance, and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on the earth.
For those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own. And indeed, if they had been thinking of that country from which they went out, they would have had opportunity to return.
But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was offering up his only begotten son.
Of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense.
By faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, and worshipped leaning on the top of his staff.
By faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave direction concerning his bones. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw the child was beautiful and they were not afraid of the king's edict.
Let's see, Robert.
By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin.
He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasure of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible.
By faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. By faith the people crossed the Red Sea, as on dry land, but the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned.
Gilbert.
By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. By faith the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe, when she had received the spies with peace.
What more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions,
quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, because valiant in battle turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection.
And others experienced mockings and scourgings, yes, also chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were put to death with the sword. They went about in sheepskins, in goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated.
Of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. And these all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise.
Mark, you got that? Verse 40.
God having provided something better for us, that they should not be made perfect apart from us.
Okay, very good. Wow, we went almost through the whole congregation there. It is a long chapter, but what a wonderful chapter it is. Of course, we are not going to be able to go through all of those examples. You guys, of course, have done that in your study. So we are going to work through kind of an overview as we go through here. So the first question here was, how does chapter 11 relate to chapter 10? Of course, this is an important thing here. What's the relationship here?
The reader to hold on to the promise of God.
Okay, hold on to the promise of God. Why? How is it possible? Okay, for the saving of their soul. How's that possible to do? I mean, as bad as the world is, what is going to make that possible? Okay, your faith. Why did God design an organization like the church and design local congregations of the Lord's church? Why do we have a whole chapter here of examples of people who have lived by faith?
So if we're in a local congregation, we together learn more faithfulness.
Okay, together. That's the word there. Together, and the fact that you're not alone out there in this whole thing. If we were alone, we would be. I mean, you've seen the nature shows on TV, and what happens to the little antelope baby that's all alone at the end, and Mama forgot about him, and so did the rest of the herd. It's lunchtime, right? I mean, that's the one that gets eaten up, and so we're in the same situation here. So basically, there are other people who have done this before, guys. This is not new. Live by faith. You can do it. I mean, that's what we're is going through here. And of course, we have some practical examples here. So taking a look at this first part, the first 3 verses, he goes into the idea of the nature of faith and what that's all about. So some of these little points that are made in verses 1 through 3 here. What does substance of things hoped for mean? This has been something that, if you can explain this to somebody, this whole idea of just some faith is just some mystical power that's out there, can't really touch it. It's blind faith, just all of these erroneous concepts of faith are out there. What does this mean? The substance of things hoped for. What is substance?
Something is made up of.
Okay, so it's tangible, right? I mean, something that has a substance is something that is tangible there. When you look at, excuse me, this is going to go on all morning. Okay, it's a substance is something that stands under something as support. Okay, so you think of the. I thought of this funny example. The U.S. dollar right now, okay, is backed by. It says that it's backed by the full faith and credit of the government. Okay, so we have dollars in our wallets, and we can go to the store and buy something with that because of faith that in fact that the government is going to be stable enough that it'll be worth something, and somebody will actually make something and take this little piece of paper cloth in exchange for it. Okay, so it's this idea of whatever it is that you have, it's only as solid as the thing that's supporting it. Okay, so you could think of it kind of like as a foundation. So here's a bonus question. So what supports your faith? What does Hebrews tell us supports our faith? Okay, the Word of God supports it. But what if I don't believe the Word of God? I'm not going to have faith. Yeah. What is it? Take a look at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6 there. Gil, would you read that for me? 11, verse 6.
Without faith it is impossible to please him, for he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him.
Okay, so what is it that supports your faith? You say the Word of God. Really? Okay. Why should I believe that? Why do you believe that? Oh, now, to a lot of people, it doesn't make any sense at all. Because they are lacking something. The belief. What is it? Belief in what? Or who? Belief in God, yeah. I mean, Todd could say something to me, all right, but unless I believe in the character of who Todd is, unless I believe in, based on experience, based on whatever, that what he's saying to me is truthful, it means nothing. But if I believe that, if I believe he's truthful, because I know, I've seen, now all of a sudden I have a substance for my faith. And it's the same thing with God. We have to believe. God has promises out there and judgment waiting for those who do not obey. Promises and judgment. Okay? He is going to reward us with one of those two in the end.
He is a rewarder. He is the rewarder of them that diligently seek him. So we've got to have enough faith in him and his word to seek him, to seek salvation.
Okay. And as a result of it's in the seeking that we do the finding, right? Okay. No seeking, no finding. And it's this idea that there's God. We have to believe that God, in fact, is truthful in what he says, because I'm not going to do anything based on something that I know to be false. There's a lot of people who go through this life saying, I know there's no God. And they don't follow him. And they believe that. And it's their belief is at times stronger maybe than mine or yours, because they act on that belief. And do we act on our belief? See, all these things, this substance is a tricky little thing right there. It's what's behind, it's what's supporting it that makes the difference. All right, question 3. What does the evidence of things not seen mean? Okay, go ahead, Francis. Okay. Okay, so you have this idea of a conviction or a confidence that what you cannot see really is there. Robert?
Romans 8 talks about hope, and if we see the thing that we hope for, it's not hope, because why would we hope for something we see? And in the context, it's talking about the whole creation groaning in the childbirth, and it's talking about trying to understand it in my simple mind sometimes. Looking at it, it's the pain that this world has been in all along, and that we're growing forward, looking to this thing. And if we could see it, we wouldn't need to hope for it. And so it ties into what was just said about how it puts hope into the idea of faith, that we might not be able to see it, but if we could see it, then what would be the point in having the hope in it, therefore faith of it?
Right. All right, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, that leads us to the evidence. You got verses like the passage in Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. Romans 1:20, for since the creation of the world his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things which are made. There is evidence there, even for one who doesn't have the faith yet. I mean, that's where I was as a young person.
It's where we all start out,
isn't it? I mean, even with the simplest of relationships with our parents, when we come out of the womb, I mean, there's an establishment of faith based on the evidence of things that we see, and then based on evidence of our interactions with people, we begin to establish pictures of who they are, and that faith begins to grow, and we form our life and our world around those ideas.
We believe in wind, even though we can't see the air, but we see the evidence of the things that it does. And I think that lends itself really into what Bill just said, in the fact that we might not be able to see it, but we see all around all the evidence of where it came from, all these things, that this world wasn't random.
Yep.
So as an example, just in my own mind, the way I thought of it was, the example being, because I know who God is and what that his promises are unfailing, I know that. I therefore then have confidence in what he says about what my reward's going to be if I do such and such and such and such. And so these things kind of build on each other there. Do you need to see it to believe it? No, but you need to believe that which directs you to where you're going, okay? And so, again, I mean, you wouldn't, I think of the forests over the years, you guys traveling out to California to see mom and dad, right? And so you know, if you had to think in Tennessee about every little turn in the road that you're going to have to take on the way out on that trip, and the other cars that suddenly are stopping and going and is something going to happen? Am I going to get a tire, blowout tire and everything? And yet the reward that's out there is tangible for you. So so you keep on going, and you keep on going, and you keep on going. And by the way, the faith involved in that is the fact that you have a map, you've been there before. There's a lot of different things that might go into that to say, I'm going to start my trip, and then to drive 3,000 miles. But those are things, God built that into us. And so it's important that we not forget that all of these examples help us to understand, but we need to understand the substance behind all of this, and that is, do I believe that God is? And if you do, then that's your starting point. And that becomes then the substance of everything that God says that you are then going to do. And then the more you do, the more your faith gets built, and the stronger it gets, and et cetera, et cetera. So let's get into some of these heroes and examples of faith in that. So question 4, how does one's faith relate to creation? This is an issue that comes up in our schools all the time. Our children are constantly faced with this. Why do we have to believe that? Okay, so let's go Francis and then over to Ken.
We believe in God, and the Bible says, and that's His word, that He created, on which day He created, and we are not going to listen to anybody else because we know.
Okay, all right. So, Ken?
It makes more sense to me to consider that an intelligent being created this world than to think that it just happened by some explosion that happened some millions of years ago, like some people seem to believe.
So there's evidence all around us about things associated with this, if we will just put them into the context that would be the proper context. So that which is seen now, the creation, was made by God, was spoken into existence. That was the power. Boom, boom. All you engineering students, it takes power, right, to be interjected into a system, to be injected in there, to be able to get, the initial start on things. And so, and that's from that which is not seen. In the beginning, God. And so we have in John 1:1, there's that perfect example. Go ahead, Todd.
Don't like to admit it, but they're essentially saying they just need one miracle. Just one.
Just one.
If you can give me the one at the beginning that I can't really explain how this tiny little thing became everything all of a sudden, with the Big Bang or whatever, however they're describing it now, then I can explain everything else, which they really can't. Doesn't make good mathematical sense that everything else happened, but just one miracle.
Yeah, just one.
It does prove right here you need some faith, don't you, to believe in even that.
Exactly. Robert?
It relates to our faith in the fact that when it comes to any kind of apologetics, when we go to argue with somebody, there has to be a baseline. If we don't have the same baseline, there's no point in making the argument because we're just going to be throwing each other's rule book at each other's head. It doesn't make sense. So you have to start with this baseline, and the one atheist I have ever sat down and had a very, very long conversation with was when I was in college. And the argument I went to was I literally pulled a leaf off the ground and I said, look at this. And I started pulling it apart and I was like, how does this make sense to you that this just was created from nothing? And I think all of this comes to the point of we have to look at it from the aspect of it does take faith to know these things, and we can't see that it was created, but we can have faith that we see the evidence of where it came from. Nothing else in this world people are okay with, so, like you were saying a minute ago, nothing else in this world that we have, anyone's going to accept came from nothing. Except for the universe as a whole.
Except for everything. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, there's lots of fun things to
discuss around that. But the thing that is fascinating to me is how quickly those with a different belief will dismiss somebody else's belief in there, and that's just religion. I speak with science, as if the basic principles of science, didn't have something of a standard of faith which is needed to be able to even take step one. Things like hypotheses and all these are faith-based kinds of things that start. So, question 5. What was the difference in the sacrifices offered by Cain and Abel? And we're going to see this phrase over and over again in chapter 11 and it's a little 2-word phrase. Starts with B. By faith. That's right. Okay, so that was the difference. And as a result of that, now how do we know though that, does it say there God told them what to do? Yeah, we do have some. Yeah, faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. So we know that the way that we gain faith is by learning, and we learn by having input to us, and it usually comes in the form of words. It could be visual. I see a bag back there. Bag, B-A-G. In English, it's a word. I see it. I therefore know, what it is. So that's how we learn. That's how that's how everything in the universe is put together. So, question 6: what 3 things did Abraham do because of his faith? And this is the basic pattern for everything. So if you know these 3, we only have to talk about it once with Abraham. If you know what Abraham did, you'll be able to see it in everybody else's faith. What was the first thing that Abraham did? Okay, God said go, he did. So the first step was obedience. Well, I thought first step was hearing and learning and all this, and maybe say that again. Oh, give me another chance. No, that's not what Abraham did. God said it, so he did it. Now, Abraham had a point of experience to work with, okay? And so did God, by the way, as far as reading who Abraham was and his heart. Okay, so what's the second thing then? As a result of his obedience, okay, he obeyed, and as a result of that obedience, God then responded with, promises. Based on what? The promises were based on Abraham's obedience in this particular case, right? God said, Abraham, go. Abraham went. God said, okay, I have promises for you now. And so the promises were the second thing. Okay, so what's the third thing then? He believed in the promise. So he obeyed, and then he believed in that promise. And so all the way at the end of Abraham's life, of course, there's a lot of other interactions and things that happened, but there was a big one that God set up for him. The sacrifice of his son. That didn't happen just, Abraham, go, leave Ur, just go, and on the way, sacrifice your son. Well, there was no son. A lot of stuff happened in between, didn't it? Between there and there. But it shows you the extent of basic faith went to sacrifice your son, the son of promise, the promise, and all the way to the end. So again, beautiful story to help us to put all of the circumstances together. If you look through all these other stories and your own stories in your own life, you'll see that you follow a similar pattern. You have to start somewhere. Faith begins somewhere. And it begins with you and me. If you can't put the blame on anybody else, and getting it going in the right direction is important. Okay, so question 7. What does these all died in faith? In verse 13 of chapter 11, these all died in faith. When they die, at the point of their death, did these people, had they already received the promise that they were seeking from God? No. What was that was the first thing in common. They didn't physically see the fulfillment of the promise. So if you didn't see it now, then there's something in the future that's going to happen that you believe, in fact, will be there. Okay? And so we see that as part of the thing. How else did they view themselves? That wouldn't have been a very happy situation, right? All God's promises, great promise, God, not for me. Really? Not for you? Okay. How did they view, universally, how did they view this compared to the promise that God had for them? How did they view this, the stuff they were doing day to day? Well, the day-to-day, and this tends to get in our way a lot, is we tend to get wrapped up in the day-to-day. Robert?
Who plants an orchard knows that he's not going, or maybe not an orchard, but a forest, an oak tree in his yard. He plants it knowing he's not going to see it to maturity. But he has the faith knowing that with the work and the plan, and the plan being nature in this case, that will grow to maturity. I think a lot of this is showing that those men died in faith, and the fact that they knew what the promise was, and they knew going forward that they had faith in God, that it would mature and His will be done.
And Abraham's promise in particular was threefold, right? You had land, not seed. Oh, seed. Number 3. And what's number 2? Nation. Yeah, so these were all things. They knew that's got to be in the future. They're not going to see it, but it was important to them because of their the family ties and everything like that. And it would be nice. You'd like to know that your family would continue into the future and all that. But was that really the future that they were, in fact, looking at, Clarissa?
They were promised the son in their old age, and Abraham and Sarah saw that promise come to fruition. And even when he was told to offer it up, he still had that faith. Well, this is the promised son, so he's either going to raise him up, or so he still acted on that faith. So they're believing in that future. Like you said, they're not going to be able to see everything to fruition, but they knew they had to do their part to start that plan, to plant that tree, to make that plan go, to fulfill those promises. He had to do his part for those promises to even take shape. So he had faith to do that because they had seen a fulfillment of a promise in getting this son. So they've already acted on that faith. They've already seen the promises be fulfilled. And so that only makes that faith grow stronger to continue in that plan, knowing that it will keep going.
So we talk about baby steps, right, from time to time, about how we proceed through life. And it really is. It's baby steps. I mean, our perspective is so short. I mean, 70 years, 80 years, 90 years. I mean, even the best of us that get, to 100 years old, I mean, that is just a drop in the bucket of eternity. And so, they weren't seen. As a matter of fact, the mystery to these guys was not the land promise and the seed promise and the great nation promise. The mystery was what comes after those. Those were just a type for the ultimate family, kingdom, etc. that was coming. That was still a mystery. But these baby steps in the meantime, these physical baby steps that went before that they found as they obeyed God and moved forward that next step, that their faith grew, and in fact, the little promises along the way, those came true too, as it went forward. But it was always out in the future, out in the future, out in the future to follow. Was that a scratch or a hand? There's a scratch. Okay, so they always considered themselves to be aliens into this world. I mean, it was always something that this was temporary, that which is to come was something else, and that they were always looking for a better land. In the case of the Jews, they were looking for a better land to live in on this earth, which was a type for the spiritual land, the spiritual Zion and all that, which was going to come later. That was still the mystery. But you see that those acts of faith back here still made all that possible as it went along. So it's still the same system used over and over again. Did you understand what I was saying on that? Okay. Clarissa went, ooh. All right, so let's go to question 8. What does the reproach of Christ mean in verse 26? The reproach of Christ. And how is this important? What one thing do we have in common with Jesus? Him being a man coming to this earth. What one thing are we going to share? So, yeah, that is a promise that we're going to face those same kinds of things, and yet, why should we then have faith to continue? Okay, so the carrot.
It goes back to that hope that we have again. We are hoping that the reproaches of Christ, the same reproaches that we bear, the same reproaches that Moses had to deal with, he's choosing that the reward for those is greater than any earthly reward that he could gain from the riches of Egypt, or for us today, anything else that we might enjoy here on earth. He's choosing something better, something spiritual.
So the better, put them up there side by side, temporary sufferings, reproaches, etc., and a big long list of folks that have faced the same thing as me, and they made it through. Jesus made it through. He made it through perfectly. Reward. Okay. Was good for them. They could do it. I can do it. And so those it's part of that endurance for faithful service. And of course, we could see this in many, many different places. Daniel chapter 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What was it that they said to the king in Daniel chapter 3, verses 17 and 18? Just before they got thrown into the fire. It's one of the greatest Bible phrases that's in there. We are not going to bow down to the. Again, just a great picture of this obedience to God. And in Acts chapter 5, when Peter is, is released from prison. And what's the reaction that he has when he gets back home? Everybody's surprised to see him. He's, oh, my back hurts. Oh, I got beat so bad. Oh, man, it was terrible. Rejoice for what? I mean, yeah, I was given the opportunity to suffer. I was considered worthy to be able to suffer. And I mean, that's a whole different way of looking at things. Okay, question 9. Keeping the Passover, verse 28, required faith in 2 ways. Okay, 2 things that you had to do. The basic problem that the Jews faced with the coming of the Passover in Egypt was, what did God say he was going to do? What's that? I think I heard it first.
Well, I mean, he was going to kill the firstborn of the Egyptians, but if they...
Just the Egyptians?
Well, those that... If they didn't do the...
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to kill the firstborn. Man, beast. I'm going to kill him. Okay. Now, what was the first reaction that the Hebrews should have had and that God was hoping that they had? That, in fact, I believe you, God. You are coming, and the firstborn is going to die. Now, God didn't just leave him there. He actually told him what to do with it. And so the second part of the belief was that they obeyed God. That anyone that put the Jew or Egyptian that put the blood over the door, they survived. Okay? So it's 2 parts in the faith. First of all, you have to believe the one saying the thing. Okay? If I have any hope of obeying, it's got to be I believe the person saying it. Okay? And once I believe what they're saying is true, then step 2, decision time. Obey or disobey. Obey is the faithful way of looking at it. And so they went ahead and did that. Okay, so finishing up chapter 11 here in the last couple minutes. Question 10 is for class discussion. So how did faith work in the lives of all those people that were mentioned in this chapter? What was the thing? We saw that they knew that they were not going to receive themselves the promise because all of these things were going to happen into the future. And I put Revelations 2 verse 10 here. What does that say? Now, does that apply to Abraham? Noah? David? Peter? You and me? Oh, we have something in common, don't we? Yeah. We didn't receive the fulfillment of the promise. Nobody. The ultimate promise is obey God, live by faith, and as a result of that obedience, I've got a home in heaven for you. That was the great mystery in the Old Testament. They were thinking about the earthly home, that one right there. And then believe that God would provide something better than this life, and that the promises of God, that's what ties us together. This whole thing is for you and me, and chapter 11 is all about a brotherhood of people who this one thing ties us all together, all in the past and into the future. Okay? All right. Next week is last lesson, and we're going to cover chapters 12 and 13 next week. So be ready to move fast.